but we're going to be speaking about unlocking the potential of personalization. So over to you guys.
Excellent, thank you so much. Everybody can, yes, look at us. Like, look at us, it's so wonderful to see you all here. Well, welcome to the panel about personalization. I know that many of you are working in the personalization space, trying to maybe do the best out of it. And I'm very much looking forward to get into the deep insights about what we should not do around personalization. I'm very, very happy to have a wonderful panel over here. We have a couple of really, really nice people here. We have David. David helps businesses mature the personalization strategies. Also working on a book on the personalization paradox. That's a paradoxical word for me for some reason. Coming up later this year, and also an expert in personalization. We also have with us Gianfranco, literally a rocket scientist, but maybe we'll talk about this in a moment. It is not a joke, right? But we'll maybe talk about it later. He's working with Natura Co. with 4 iconic brands, Aesop, Avon, Natura, and The Body Shop to set the personalization vision. And then we also have with us Rasmus Houlind, Chief Experience Officer at Agillic, an omnichannel marketing automation platform from the wonderful city of Copenhagen, Denmark. Also working on a book, I heard. And Gianfranco, by the way, as well. I think Rob maybe too.
It's a club.
No, we'll see. And we also have Rob Boland, Senior Solution Architect at Klaviyo, a marketing automation platform for email and SMS from London, which is exciting as well, I would say, right?
I'm actually from Ireland.
Oh, all right. Here we go. All the things we don't know about you. Excellent.
Are you working on a book, Rob?
We'll talk about that. By the end of the session, it might change. We'll see how it goes. So, personalization, right? I think that before we even start diving into some of the things that we all care about here, I'm very kind of happy to see, hopefully, controversial opinions. Rachel promised a lot of controversial opinions. Whew. Let's see how we can do that, right? And maybe let's start with one of the controversial questions. What is personalization in the first place? I think when we think about personalization, very often there is a lot of confusion around segmentation, customization, personalization, A/B testing, how all of this fits into, let's say, one strategy. So I think that might be a good question for David. David, you like those kind of questions, don't you?
Sure, give me the hard one.
Yes. So what is personalization? Why does it even matter?
Well, when it comes to... One of the first questions I got asked when writing the book was this guy called Shiva Manjuth, and he's the experimentation manager at Solo Brands, this big company in the US. And he said, David, the one thing that is preventing personalization from going forward is that no one knows what the... Can I swear? Well, what the hell it is.
No. That's okay.
What the hell it is. Someone somewhere needs to define it and needs to put it in a box. So that was my quest. So I went away and looked at all these different definitions. And what I learnt was I don't think we do need to define it. I think when we define it, it becomes something binary. Are we personalising or aren't we personalising? Really, it's more of a scale. It's how much are we personalising, not if we're doing it or not. I mean, really, it's this scale of optimization more than anything. You know, this one to all, one to many, one to few, one to one kind of ethereal movement. So I don't think we need to define it. I actually think if we define it, you basically get this dictionary definition of a bunch of static words clumped together in a sentence that creates a generic meaning. So for me, it's actually more important not to say, what is it, but why are we doing it? That's my take.
That would be a nice follow-up question, actually, I would say. Yeah, Gianfranco, you want to change that?
So just picking up on that piece, I think that most of us here are marketeers or technologists, and I think that ultimately all we're trying to do is to meet the needs and wants of customers, right? So what we're trying to do is a customer wants to get from A to B, and that's what personalization, segmentation, optimization, A/B testing, that's all we're trying to deliver as marketeers and technologists. We're trying to help the customer do what they need to do. And sometimes we want to do it so that it's fun. Sometimes we want to do it so that we're educating. And we want to do it, as the guys from Sea Salt this morning talked about, we want to do it in a way that is right for our brand. So again, I know we're meant to be controversial, but I kind of agree with you at this point that I think it's just semantics. We're here to do what's right for the customer.
Right, but you also, yeah.
I actually disagree with David, and I think like
keep going.
Yeah, I'm gonna kick your ass. No, just kidding. No, I think we do need a definition of personalization because what I find is that there are different sort of tribes of marketers that are claiming, and indeed they are, not only claiming, but they are working with personalization, but they're working with it in very different angles. So you'd have the ones who are working with advertising, might be doing personalized advertising. You'll have the ones working with owned media campaigns. You'll have the ones working with marketing automation. You'll have the ones working with product recommendations or article recommendations and such. And they're all working with personalization. So I do agree that the definition will be rather broad, but I think there's a point in having it broad because everyone who gets a paycheck from working with personalization, you can't really go and tell them that they got it wrong or that they're not working with kosher or personalization or whatever. So I think if we can agree on a very broad definition of personalization, that will include all the people who are working with personalization, so we won't alienate anyone. We can finally start figuring out, okay, so there are different types of personalization, and I agree there are different sort of degrees to which you can personalize. But I still think we need the definition, or else we'll sort of never get along. We'll just sitting in each of our corners saying that. So we're working with the right form of personalization.
But I think it's also interesting that I want to kind of build up on top of what Gianfranco was saying, because when you think about what personalization ultimately tries to achieve is to help people get their work done. Basically, that's it, right? And of course, trying to find the right. Okay, I'm trying to define it. That's probably a dangerous path here, given that you are personalization experts, but. Basically giving people some sort of way to get where they want to get. And this is, of course, something that's very, very typical. But one thing that Gianfranco was saying is give them a kind of a way to do it well. So how do we then do personalization well? If we maybe not necessarily have different views about how to define it, what makes a good personalization strategy? So that's actually a question I wanted to bring to Rasmus first.
Right. Thanks. Well, so a good personalization strategy, I think you need to look at the customer journey first. So imagine the customer journey be like one large ribbon. I should have brought a ribbon. I promise I'll do it next time. But imagine your customer journey is one big ribbon, like from the moment you meet a customer until they don't want to talk to you again for whatever reason. And throughout many places in this ribbon, it will be, some of these places will be like really important moments of truth in the customer journey, places where you want to win their attention. You desperately want to get them from one end of the ribbon to the other. And basically what you want to do there is not make sure, first of all, that the ribbon doesn't break, and make sure that if it breaks, you not only stitch it together, but you tie a beautiful bow. A beautiful bow tie. So the main model of my book, Hello First Name, is actually the bow tie of personalization. So you have the insights in one end, you have the content in the other, and you put it together in a way that it doesn't only sort of fix and remove friction from the customer journey, but you make it pleasurable and memorable and obviously personalized for the end customer. And if you're able to tie those bows on the most critical parts of your customer journey, then I think you're onto something good.
Okay. Also, maybe Rob, building on top of that, I know that you spent quite a bit of time working or thinking around this idea of personalizing at scale, and also kind of defining that strategy at scale, which can be quite challenging. Can you share some insights on that?
Yeah. One of the little tricks I've found recently is stop trying to personalize for everyone, because you can't do it for everyone. But turn it the other way around and let the customer personalize it themselves. So a little example that I have for this recently is there's a lovely jumper company we work with. They're called Sheep Inc. And they basically make jumpers out of wool from sheep. But every product that you get, they make jumpers, hats, T-shirts, they have a sheep tag on them. So anyone who's ever been on a farm, they've seen probably what a sheep tag looks like. But it's got a QR code on it, so when you buy your product, you get it in the box, and you scan the QR code. And that brings you to their site, where there you start to personalize everything about your relationship with that brand yourself. They've turned it into a bit of a game. They go, pick your sheep in the field. And they have like a real-time GPS trackers on sheep in fields that they have in New Zealand. I'm not making it up. Go buy their stuff. You pick your sheep. They show you this picture of a sheep. You give the sheep a name. So I call mine Molly. And then they send you updates about Molly the sheep. So you feel so connected and so attached to that brand They haven't had to do anything. I've actually given them all of my personal story that I want. And they've even turned it into, I don't know if anyone here remembers Tamagotchi, those little Tamagotchi games. They made a Tamagotchi game where you feed your sheep. And you can give them grass and mushrooms and carrots. And I've so engaged with the brand, and it's so personal to me. It's my sheep. They're my clothes that are coming from this brand. And it's really clever where they haven't had to try and figure out what you want. You're actually telling the brand what you want to get directly. So I think it's a really cool way of looking at it. It's something different.
Right.
I think that's really nice because it kind of takes that idea of customization, but the brand is learning from the way that you're customizing, you're self-personalizing the experience. And then as long as the brand remembers that and learns from that. So I stayed in a hotel last night, and when I checked in, I was a bit annoyed because they hadn't remembered that I'd been there 2 years earlier, but that's just high expectations these days. But when I checked in, they said, well, what kind of room do you want? Do you want a low room? Do you want a high room? Do you want a high room with a city view or a courtyard view? And I picked a particular room. I wanted a city view. I didn't get a city view, but there you go. That's one failure. But the key thing now in terms of personalisation is, will they remember that the next time I check into that hotel, that's the type of room that I want. So that should be to the fore when they give me the choice at check-in. So I think that idea of learning from customers and letting them choose, I think is really nice. A really important aspect of personalisation.
Well, I guess we'll find out when you're staying next time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we know where you're going to stay next time.
It was in the Travel Lodge, was it? We're staying in the Travel Lodge.
No, I went upmarket. I went Premier Inn.
We'll talk about that later.
Oh, bugger.
Also, maybe building up on top of Rob was saying, I think it's interesting that there are these emotional connections which are absolutely incredible. Like sometimes you might remember about or think about the brand without even remembering necessarily what it looks like or what you bought from them, like years later because of those stories. But now comes the part when it's really becoming interesting, because at one point we want to use personalization to drive something, and usually it's going to be business KPIs, it's probably going to be profit, it's probably going to be conversion, it's probably going to be the sale, right? This is what is probably very, very, A/B test, or whatever you want to see there. So how do you then play this long game without playing the short-term game? Because very often, in my experience, you get to this point where you run an experiment, an A/B test, and then, we could do that, but it doesn't bring the revenue, so sorry, let's dismiss that and move on, right? So very much it's still driven by this idea, does it work? Did it work in this 2 weeks of testing or 1 month of testing or so? How do you bring this emotional component to it? David, I know you have very strong opinions on that.
Yeah, well, so I wore this T-shirt specifically for that question today. So it's Scrooge McDuck. I'm a big Disney fan, and it's Scrooge McDuck basically looking at his money. And you think of the Disney brand as this guest experience that's magical and beautiful, and you get to meet Mickey, and it's awesome, and it's one of my favourite things. But really, they're nickel and diming the customer every time you go. It's short-termist mentality to try and draw. Everything's focused on margin. And I really like your example before, Rob. And I've heard very few examples like that, because I would like to ask, what is the attribution from that thing? How does someone get that level of freedom to go away and do something that's all about the guest experience and in theory not about the immediate short-termist revenue? So you look at examples like Netflix. Netflix, they were cited as saying personalization for them was a 10-year leap of faith because their main attribution was one of retention, not one of acquisition. We live in a world where more is more, where acquisition is sexier than retention, where VCs are looking over our backs to say we need more growth on last year and last year and last year. To answer your question, in my mind, when you're trying to combat against that immediate short-termist, overly commercial viewpoint, it all comes down to one thing. Suspense. And that is purpose. Why are you doing what you're doing? The reason why Netflix personalizes is different than the reason why the New York Times does. When we look at commercial entities, retailers more often, then they're in the market to make a quick buck. So is it really a question of adding value to customers or exploiting value from customers?
I have a comment to that. So I believe that it's always a matter of value creation from the company's point of view, or you wouldn't be doing personalization to begin with. But then you can argue whether we are thinking short-term or long-term. So, and I find these sort of the sheep tactics, as we all relate to it as the sheep tactic now. That would definitely create some like emotional feelings towards the brand. And we can also have people like give up data that we can then later use to personalize, and we can send them updates. We have an excuse for sort of being in contact. I think that probably won't lead to short-term conversions, but it definitely will. I think that would be my idea, that it would lead to long-term customer lifetime value, because it's more like of a branding exercise, really. You could also discuss whether it's strictly speaking personalization, but we promise not to do that, I suppose.
But how do you actually measure it? Like, I mean, you need to be in a long game. Like, you have to be interested. I mean, a good strategy in general is both short-term improvements and also long-term vision of what we want to be. How do you really measure this emotional impact of personalization?
Well, personalization is just one part of the overall marketing strategies that you'll have as an organization. And I think that ultimately it's about showing that there are other metrics you can put into play that you can use to convince different parts of the business that personalization, customer experience drives those metrics. And those metrics might be NPS, they might be word of mouth, they might be customer retention number, customer churn figures. But ultimately, it's about playing those numbers in the right way so that you can, practically, you need to convince the CFO that these numbers shift the dial in terms of revenue, because ultimately you're not going to get the budget that you need. And purpose is right. It's about playing the long-term game and saying that actually this is about what we're going to be doing in 18 months, 3 years, 5 years' time, but also showing the short-term victories to make sure that you can prove that even at small scale, you are delivering value to the business.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's about confidence. So a question, is it more important to know where the direction that you're rowing in or how fast you're rowing the boat? So it comes down to attribution. I don't think there's one single metric to define that. We're talking about relationships at the end of the day. How do you attribute a relationship? It's about familiarity, acknowledgement, friendliness, trustworthiness. One of the ways, to Cecil's point before, one of the ways that you can give confidence to the CFO is through experimentation. So how do you do that? Well, if you experiment on an individual by individual tactical basis, then you're most likely looking at very tactical short-termist metrics like conversion rate or revenue. So you can collate all those things and you can do what's known as a back test. Victoria's Secret did this about a year and a half ago, and they collated all their personalization experience, set 5% away for a control of no personalization experience, and hey-ho, they spent 12 months navel-gazing just to find out that they made an improvement. But it gave them something to put on the spreadsheet as a line item to say it gave us an improvement of X, and I understand why we do it. We can allocate resource to that and understand the return on investment and yada, yada, yada. But there's a bit of a rant to basically say it's a combination of metrics.
Right. Rob?
Yeah. I think sometimes people look at the wrong ones. Very often it's, okay, did sales increase? Yes or no? And that's kind of, people get laser focused on sales. But sometimes there's other channels that you should be looking at, like a typical one that everyone forgets to look at when they're looking at sales. They go, oh, sales didn't go up. Did you check if your return rate went down? Are customers actually keeping your products for longer now? Are they enjoying them? And it's very easy to forget to check the other stuff that you're meant to, like every test has a knock-on reaction somewhere else. So while you may have constant sales, but you launch this beautiful post-purchase flow or journey, and suddenly everyone's keeping the product and they don't return anymore. Or has your referral program suddenly gone through the roof? So don't forget to look in the other places instead of just focusing on sales all the time.
Yeah, so I think really having this holistic overview from the business perspective about all the things that we actually care about, right? And then looking at all the different facets of that experience, the customer experience, the financial revenue, the revenue, and things like that, that's really, really critical. But we still need to organize it all in some way. So on the one hand, let's imagine we want to personalize. I want to personalize better or well. Like that also requires a team that requires some skills, that requires some setup, that requires a buy-in from the top to experiment, right? To do all the things that we mentioned. So what would make a good setup, or what kind of skills would be required to run a good personalization? Rasmus, I think you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do. Well, first of all, I think there are sort of three main things that you need to consider. First of all, which people and skills do we have? And you need technology, which is also why we're sitting here,
no
I suppose.
pins here.
I mean, you can't, there's no marketing without technology anymore, almost. I mean, unless you're like super clever and creative. And third, you would be needing to put those things into structure and apply the right governance. And there's sort of three maturity levels within these three disciplines. Or in my book, I put it into like sides of a pyramid, the back end of the pyramid. What is it that supports the actual personalized communication that is meant to make the big difference? And your question was, which kind of skills do you need? Well, it depends, because if we're talking about personalization, there are many ways of working with personalization. So you can choose to have like an website-only perspective on personalization, and in that case, you'd be needing software like Klaviyo, for instance, or you'd be needing other software similar working on platforms, and you'd be needing people who are specialists in working with UX and CX on the web platforms or in apps and inbound platforms. Whereas if you're working with personalization within marketing automation, you'd be working with email marketing and outbound marketing with like push notifications and text messages and such. A whole different skill set, more outbound mindset to work with. Or if you're working with advertising person. So there's really no simple way of, depends on where you are, which department are you in, you'll be needing different skills depending on that department. But once you get to a certain level, the funny thing is, it's the top of the pyramid, things start to merge. So what drives the highest value is if you go the errand that won't upset the customer. So the call to actions that you'll be suggesting will be equally in favor of the end customer as it will in the favor of the organization. You'll be working more towards sort of a next best experience approach, and you'll be working from an omnichannel perspective. So in the end it merges, but I think personalization starts in the different inherent marketing disciplines.
Okay. Yes, Gianfranco?
No, I was going to give just a practical example of how we're doing that right now, and the way that we're setting it up is actually, because we're looking at it from an omnichannel perspective, is we're setting up essentially a global team, which originally I was going to call the Global Omnichannel Activation Team, but then I realised that GOAT, I wasn't going to do that. But it's about having a central team that actually looks at the customer.
They could become the scapegoat, though.
That's the problem. Yeah, so they're not going to be called GOAT. So it's about creating that central team and at the core of that is having someone who owns the customer, but also having someone who looks after the technology perspective. Because I think that having that dual focus within that global team enables you then to kind of put customer first and try to understand then what are the right technologies that will support that customer vision that you've got. So, but technology comes second. It's customer first. So think of it that way, and then you build out the teams sitting beneath that, depending on what channels you're using at the time. Yeah.
And also thinking about customers first. I think I cannot have the session about personalization without thinking about one thing that's been kind of very prominent over the last couple of years, and it's the notion of privacy. So, by the way, hello everyone. My name is Vitaly. I'm working with the European Parliament. That's not a joke. And privacy is very, very important. And obviously, collecting data is a story of its own. And very often what you see, and this is kind of one of the stories I found, I think I read in New York Times, I think recently, where the idea was, there was a company that was actually customizing off-boarding experience to make it more difficult for people to leave, to cancel a plan, or to leave, kind of close an account, based on their preferences. So make it more difficult to leave. That sounds to me like an unethical decision in many ways, and a very deceptive practice, but there is no regulation against that. And so I'm wondering, where do we find that balance between, we want data, obviously personalization partly at least depends on having the right amount of data about the customers, but also being respectful about just the right amount of data and not kind of having this kind of deceptive patterns at all. I know, again, David, you have a very strong opinions about things. You have a strong opinion on that, don't you?
What comes first, business or customer? I think that's just all it really comes down to. There's a really good example that I like to often cite, and it's, we wouldn't be in a personalization panel if we didn't mention Amazon. But you have, Jeff Bezos, the pioneer of personalization, arguably, who's like, customer first. If we have 4.5 million customers, we should have 4.5 million different stores. He's also the chap that said, your margin is my opportunity. And, considering they're the pioneers of recommendations, as it were, it's how YouTube, even 20 years on, still use their recommendations algorithm. They just got fined £900 million by the EU Commission because of their practices of putting higher margin products in certain recommendations areas rather than what is actually best for the customer. So, to go back for the use of data, for me it always comes back to it's customer first, not business first. And I actually think these regulations are a bloody brilliant thing, because I think it forces us to be more creative in our practices to do what's actually right for the customer, not what is right for the business. Gone are the wild, wild west days of the cookie. So I think it's great.
And I think that when I had the opportunity to work at group level for a year or so, one of the notions that we sold into the various brands was the fact that think about the fact that data, customer data, might at some point sit on your balance sheet. All right, a brand might sit on your balance sheet at the moment, but think about how the quality of the data might sit on your balance sheet in 5 years' time. So actually, the rules, regulations, guidelines that are now in place, if you go above and beyond those, and that was always our intention, not to set a minimum level in terms of trust, ethics, and privacy, but imagine in 5 years' time, the quality of the data, the quality of the consented data, engaged data that is sitting on your balance sheet is worth US dollars, pounds, euros, whatever it might be. It frames that conversation in a slightly different way so that the business does think about the fact, oh, actually, you know what, shit, we should be... Sorry, I did swear then, didn't I? Sorry, I didn't ask. You think about it that way, and then the business does start to think about the quality of the data and the value and the consent levels that you have in that data.
Right. And of course, kind of related to that, I think we have a lot of conversation also today in the first session about JDBT and the future of... AI in general kind of really defining our future in many ways, right? And obviously we have to bring it into personalization as well, because we have so much data, we can do so much with just so much data. The question, however, is it, this is something that may be very personal, sorry for the personal question, but are we going to get in the position where things will look a little bit too strange to customers? Like, this is too personalized for me. They know maybe a little bit too much about me, this uncanny valley of personalization. Are we getting there already? Like sometimes you can't really tell. Is it a personalized messaging that I'm consuming, or is it just a general messaging that I'm consuming? So are we getting to this position already, and how do we get out from this if we are?
Well, I think you're just trying to find that level of creepiness, and you don't want to cross the line in terms of creepiness. I remember once getting an email from, this is quite a while ago now, and they don't do it anymore, but I got an email from, I remember it was John Lewis, saying that we noticed that you've spent a bit of time on our bedroom department online. And I kind of went, I have, but that's like just a bit too much. And so it's just trying to find the right balance and what's right for customers, but also using personalization in the wrong way. So everyone talks about the Spotify Wrapped bit of personalization where they tell you about the music you've been listening to over the last 12 months. And I think Spotify are great in terms of the way that they then give you live music recommendations based on what you're listening to on the app. But I remember that I think Cafe Nero then started sending me an email telling me about the amount of coffee and what coffees I'd been drinking over the last month or so. And I started thinking, shit, I've done it again, haven't I? Do I really drink that much coffee? And it actually stopped me drinking coffee or less coffee. So you kind of need to think about why you're doing this personalization. Are you just because you've seen it somewhere else, so you think it's a really cool idea, or is it really adding value to the customer experience?
Right.
We were discussing creepiness, and I think there's certain things that you can do to steer clear of creepiness and not end up in the uncanny valley. But first of all, I think it's important to say that most companies are no way near any kind of uncreepy value because they don't have the data and they just get started and they're basically just doing hello, first name, personalization in emails. So
or maybe they have a data, but they don't know what to do with it.
Exactly. So what tends to drive the sensation of creepiness? If you're using data that the consumer isn't aware that you have on them. So if they weren't aware that you were collecting browse behavior from the websites, for instance, say that you were browsing Victoria's Secret, and you were looking at a fairly intimate underwear, and suddenly they start addressing that to you in well-meant retargeting on emails. You looked at this super kinky outfit, would you care to see more of those? That may come across as a bit too creepy for some, because they weren't aware that you were collecting this data. Or what you could do instead is to, I think, distinguish between explicit and implicit personalization. So maybe not say directly, make it completely evident for the customer that you are using data. Make it seem as more of a coincidence that now you are communicating about these fairly kinky outfits, but it's just a coincidence. So you're not showing it directly that this is an act of personalization. It's just random to some extent. This maybe a bit grey hat in this area, but say that you are addressing topics that are touchy, like divorce, for instance. So we have so one of the expert panels for the group. There was a pension company talking about how they could collect website data and see through an algorithm who was most likely going through a divorce. And addressing that explicitly is super dangerous, but addressing it implicitly, or maybe even getting people to supply data, like from zero-party data perspective, that yes, I am going through a divorce, would open up for really interesting conversations between the pension company or the bank or whatever. So I think the topics, if they're touchy, be more implicit. If you're using data that people aren't aware you're collecting, be more implicit or don't do it at all. Because it'll be too much, you'll end up becoming creepy.
And also maybe probably just being polite about those things instead of just making assumptions about what people are like, what they're going to think and all that. Just maybe asking
assumptions
questions.
Are super dangerous.
Yeah. I think, Rob, you wanted to add something as well.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of say, I think we hit the creepy phase like 5-10 years ago, and we grew out of it. As a humanity, it's a big win for us, I think. Everyone's probably heard some variant of Tesco. Tesco Club Card, where people would scan as you shop, and a father found out his daughter was pregnant before she told him, because Tesco were being a bit too creepy and sending him all his Club Card offers for all this baby stuff, and he had no idea what was going on. So I think brands learnt a lot from that, and we actually learned there is this level of too personalized, too creepy, and we've kind of scaled it back a little bit to be a bit more helpful as opposed to being creepy, I think.
Right, and Gianfranco, I think you also wanted to add something.
Oh no, I just on the back of using data for recommendations. And my wife bought me for Christmas a book on Amazon using my account called "This Is How Your Marriage Ends." So I have been getting some weird recommendations on Amazon.
Talk about divorce.
Oh yeah, a little bit, yes.
I think it's a good point, Robert. That there are, and it was a Target example. So if you're looking for it, it was Target from the US that had this pregnancy example. But what they did, the solution to this, as not to annoy any more fathers by predicting pregnancy with teenage daughters, what they did is that they actually toned it down. So they would still present these products if, like, there was an algorithm saying that these are the right products, but they would sort of not make them sort of the main story of the message. So instead they would, like in the hero position of an email, for instance, they would put bananas or something like pretty less dangerous product, but the pregnancy test would be immediately beneath, but it would appear as if it were a coincidence. So that's kind of how they solved that. So making it less obvious. Also, you could exclude products. So for instance, we're working with one of the biggest health and beauty retailers in Denmark. They're excluding products that they feel would be offensive. So for instance, if you have like a teeth prosthesis, then you need certain glue for that apparently. And so filtering that out, they're also selling vibrators, and they would never choose to have those products in an email, for instance. So for outbound communication, they're totally filtered out.
Okay, Gianfranco? No?
No, I was just saying, the thing is with AI and the way that personalization is going at the moment, yes, we're becoming really super clever about this, and so to the extent where we think we know what the customer wants before the customer thinks that they know or they need it. And this is maybe a little bit philosophical, but part of that is kind of going, well, are we actually removing free will from customers, right? And are we just using our own devices to move customers down a particular route that we want them to go down? Or where's the serendipity in finding new products now? So if we're being super, super clever, are we actually doing the customer an injustice?
Yeah. I think it's more than that. I completely agree. There's the ethics, there's the echo chambers and filter bubbles that we've all heard of. Mark Zuckerberg once said that people may be more interested in a squirrel in their back garden than people dying in Africa. There is all this ethical debate around it, do not get me wrong, but I also think AI in general is a science, is a pure science, whereas personalization is all about being more personable. It's a verb to be more personable. And that is a human connection. That is all about relationship and connection. When we think about it's a marketing principle, when we think about marketing as a whole, it's this combination between the art and the science. And slightly more ethereal, like you said, I don't know whether we are tipping the balance more in favour of the science than the art.
I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever been into an ESOP store, but when you walk into an ESOP store, you get an amazing experience. The consultants there are fantastic. They'll spend 30 to 40 minutes with you at a sink trying to find the right products for you. And our challenge at ESOP was not to try and replicate that, because you can't replicate that human experience. It was trying to find a consistent approach so that once you left the store, we could talk to you in a way that was very Aesopian without becoming Keels. I love Keels, but the number of emails I get in my inbox that are offering me discount after discount after discount is just excessive. But it's about, you're right, it's about maintaining that human touch as part of all this, and it is finding the right balance between art and science.
I think at this point, before I'd like to open up the conversation for the wonderful audience, maybe just to wrap it up, I would love to get maybe one final word of wisdom from you. If you wanted, let's say, to send a message to the wonderful people attending here, what would that be around personalization or anything really that really matters to you at this point, David?
Personalization.
Just a quick
sentence. Yeah, personalization is the verb to be more personable. So, be more personable.
In the words of Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So it's an evolution. It's not, you'll never have the final solution from day one.
I think my message would be watch the space of generative AI and explore how that can help you create more content variants more easily, or even make that as a democratized process for your employees, making that happen. I'm super curious to see how that'll evolve.
I always say this stuff is really hard, so don't hit yourself if you're not doing it well. It's actually really hard to do it, but don't be afraid to try and do it. Think of my little sheep. Think of Molly the sheep in the fields.
We always will. We always will. This is never going to change anytime soon.
And just imagine your brand. Try and do that for your brand, that experience.
This might become like a hashtag or something. We're just going to start a movement here. I'm sure, the sheep personalization. All right. Thank you so much for the wonderful replies. But before we wrap up, sorry? We're running out of time? No, we have time for questions, right? Do we have any questions in here that you'd like to bring up? My wonderful colleagues will be happy to throw you a microphone. So I think we have one question all the way on the top, over there. Throwing would be a little bit too difficult, I think, at this point. Oh, here we go. Oh, okay. That worked.
Good, it wasn't the baseball.
Hey. Hello, hi, Mike check. Thanks for that. That was brilliant. Great panel there. I guess the question is how we take personalization into account and also taking into account like generative AI and how things in a way are becoming a little bit more monolithic. You type in how to write an email marketing newsletter and you'll kind of get very similar responses a lot of the time. And it's how do we make the personalization adapt to the multifaceted nature of like human beings. So you talked about the Travelodge, Premiere an example. You wanted a city view, and the next time you go back, it's got, he wants the city view, but you know what? You didn't really enjoy that city view. You want the South Bank view. You want the car park view this time. I guess it's like, maybe not, but I guess it's like, how do you take into account, how does personalization take into account that we are constantly changing people as well?
So I think that as brands, we have opportunities post that experience to try and understand whether it was the right experience for you. So again, going back to the ESOP example, when you go through that experience in the ESOP store, you might buy 3 products in there. And one of the first things that you get is actually, we don't try and sell you more products. We try and elicit some experience from you, after about 30 days to understand, actually, those 3 products that the consultant spent half an hour talking to you about and ultimately you buying, were they the right 3 products for you? And if they weren't, come back into us and we'll readdress that for you. So I think that this is why I think it's with customers, it's an iterative process. You are constantly learning, constantly getting information from different touch points to understand what is right for that customer.
But I think there's a good point that you're making, actually, that we will never actually know what's going on in the real customer experience, because the customer experience belongs to the customer, and whatever they're doing in their life, whatever else is going on, we can't really know for sure what their intention is. I mean, we can be less wrong, and basically I think that's what personalization is all about. So we can suggest things that we think are less irrelevant, and sometimes we have better clues, we have better insights, and we can. And if we're dead sure, like for instance, if you have like explicit data from a customer saying this is my preference or whatever, then you can choose to be like really explicit. Or you bought this very product. This is how other people are making the best of or the most of it. So we're working with a retailer in Denmark. They're selling health and beauty, and the moment that you buy into a new category, for instance, the follow-up that you'll get, I mean, instantly you're in a suppression list for all campaigns, and instead you'll be receiving helpful communication about how you apply this new type of makeup or skincare or whatever. And actually, in terms of long-term and short-term revenue, also you'd expect this to sort of benefit the long-term and the customer relationship. But guess what? It also impacts the short-term revenue as well, which is a surprise to most people involved with this. Plus, they can sell it as retail media to their suppliers. So it's like win-win-win kind of situation.
One more question? No, unfortunately. Well, I'm sure that our wonderful speakers are not going anywhere. Do you? No, just hang out here.
Just sitting here.
So if you have any questions, please come. Have a conversation, chat, coffee, water, anything. They are very much available to you. And thank you so much for the panelists for being here, and to you, of course, for joining in and being a part of this. So thanks, everyone.